Well, good morning. I'm Michael Weaver. I'm the string program coordinator and the orchestra director at North Greenville University. And I am also the higher education representative for South Carolina American String Teachers Association. I am here this morning with world-class violinist Alexander Markov. He has traveled the world playing with many of the major orchestras, and he is here in Greenville, South Carolina this weekend to play the Paganini Concerto No. 1 with the Greenville Symphony Orchestra under the direction of Edvard Chilchil. He's renowned for his interpretations of the Paganini's concertos and his caprices and other major works by other composers as well. Mr. Markov, what a pleasure it is to be with you today.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I love the town. It's beautiful, gorgeous.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Since you're here to do the Paganini, can we ask a few questions
Please.
regarding that? So, I understand that you were first exposed to it when you were 12 years old, and your father moved to Vienna. And can you
Yeah, well, we originally from Russia.
Yeah.
We immigrated when I was 12 years old, and we first, eventually we want to come to America, but you have to wait for a visa. So we went to Vienna and stayed there for a few months.
Yeah.
But since I was a kid, I was also always fascinated with Paganini because he was this kind of a mysterious figure of the 19th century who literally reinvented everything we know about the violin with the technique and the double harmonics and the left-hand pizzicatos and all this crazy wild stuff. He was like a rock star of the day, really. And he was really the first artist to launch this romantic era in a big way. Then came, of course, Liszt for piano and others, but he was the first kind of a person who made the violin to be a star of the show, where people would actually buy tickets to hear the violin in concert. That was the main attraction. Mm-hmm. Versus before it was kind of a part of the other things like chamber music and symphonies or operas, whatever. But he made it. And of course, all the famous legends that he sold to the devils. He was this big rebel and revolutionary. So always, since I was a kid, I was very fascinated by him. And of course, I learned his concerto when I was like 12.
So you learned the concerto at 12 years old?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Very good.
But you'll be surprised that ironically, I remember my father, he was my main teacher over the years. Ironically, he gave me Mendelssohn, which technically is less challenging, as you could imagine.
Yes.
But somehow, musically, when I was a kid, Paganini I could connect better. And therefore, technically, it was easier to handle, if you can believe it.
Oh, very interesting. So, then what is your favorite part of the concerto?
Well, believe it or not, I love the second movement. I know usually in America they love more the second movement of his second concerto.
Yes.
But I don't know, I love that really dramatic, passionate second movement, very emotional. It's dark and it's sweet. It's like it has all those incredible emotions. It's a very operatic in a good way.
Well, would you mind giving us a slight preview of that?
Of course. Well, it goes like, So it starts just nice melody, but so it just starts as a beautiful, but then it starts to build towards the end. It goes. More passionate. And then eventually. So towards the end it gets very dramatic and passionate, and it starts off. So it's very beautiful. And of course, the first movement is a masterpiece. I play with the main melody. You see, I think what Paganini did was something very, very smart as a composer and as a showman, is that he knew a good balance that, there's some composers of his era, I don't want to mention the names, even though they're dead for many years, but still, it's like they put technique on top of technique on top of technique, and one frankly get disconnected, especially those who are not violinists. Because, okay, how long can you do that shredding of the day. It was like a shredding what they do today, And what Paganini did, he mixed, this, crazy passages, all the stuff. But then he would put some beautiful melodies throughout.
Right.
And he would build a very nice, that was his thing in general, not just in this concerto, but he would find a healthy balance between melody, so people can connect emotionally, and then showing off to, the technique, of course, which was the big thing. And cadenza in this concerto is very famous by Émile Sauret, and at some years ago, it was almost unplayable back then. So many, many, many years ago when, I think it was Brussels competition, when Leonid Kogan won the first prize, the fact that at the finals he dared to put on a program that he was playing that cadenza was already amazing that he dared. Now everybody is doing it, of course. But in general, I think that's Paganini's very strong sign of really understanding how to connect to the audience and impress them and know when to stop.
Well, speaking of connecting to people, you've been playing this concerto since you were 12 years old. So how has your interpretation changed over the years, or has it? And if it has, in what ways and what have you done with it?
I have to say, but I think it got better.
Okay.
And I'm serious, I'm not just saying it because, you see, after years, I start to understand that, when you're much younger, you just want to show off. Like you go on stage, like, look, I can do this, like I do this, and you're excited. But then at some point of your life, when you mature yourself as an artist and you play other concertos and everything, you start to see this from a much bigger perspective. And I understood that, again, the balance of melodic, I take a little bit more time now. And I think it comes across much stronger that way, because let people cool off a bit, and then you go another firework thing,
Thank you very much for sharing with us.
Oh.
Now, from what I've gathered, you have an affinity for Led Zeppelin. So, when did you first come across them, and what about them caught your attention?
Originally, when I was a kid, came to America, I hated all the type of music completely. I was this serious classical kid who was raised in a family of my father, a concert violinist and a teacher, and my mom played at the Bolshoi Opera as a violinist. And then, of course, the Soviet regime, rock and roll is a big taboo. But I was listening to the Beatles, big fan, a huge fan. Came to America, went to high school here in America, and some of my friends took me to one of the movies of Led Zeppelin. I think it's called Song Remains the Same. That was like tremendous eye-opener for me, because I saw this tremendous expression. It's like a whole new world for me. And like they say, opposites attract. It went in much more extreme way, because again, the Beatles I listened for fun, entertainment. Even though everybody in school teased me, oh, why you listen to all this old music, Even then they used to tease me. Yeah. I didn't care, I listened to what I liked, But with Led Zeppelin, it was different, because Jimmy Page used bow, and it's like you could connect, and the riffs that they used, there was much more connection. Like if you have bands like, thrash or like Metallica or bands like that, they use like this very rhythmical pattern, much more hard to translate to the violin, because we're not used to it. But Led Zeppelin or Black Sabbath or groups of that era is much easier to connect, because they use like individual riffs, and it's very easy to play, frankly.
Well, you mentioned Franz Liszt earlier, and you know that Franz Liszt watched Paganini in performance, and then what he decided to do is he says, I want to do that for the piano. Are you sort of thinking that you're doing for classical music what Led Zeppelin did for rock and roll?
I think with electric violin, I'm trying to do something new. I think with classical, for me, I feel like I'm continuing a tradition. Says my father did this, his teacher did this, and on, and I'm carrying the torch. I think more specifically what you said, I think it more applies to my electric violin, where there's so many great guitarists, electric, but there are not so many they're not really Jimi Hendrixes of electric violin yet. And that gets my interest, because it's like you have an empty space which hasn't been voided yet.
So you mentioned your electric violin, and your electric violin is gold, and it has 6 strings. That is so fascinating.
I thought that I want the violin that, first of all, would sound a little bit more like a guitar to give this more edge to the sound. But in the market, I couldn't find the one that has the sound and the looks that would represent. So I contacted a great designer and a friend of mine, James Remington, and I asked him to design for me a violin that would not just sound rock and roll, but also look the part. So he made this really interesting design. It's like a almost hybrid between guitar and the violin.
Yes.
It's covered with gold, just for nice aesthetics. And it's got 6 strings, like you said, because I need that low range. Again, because when you have 4 strings only, it's in a higher register. Normal violin, its tone is singing and it's sweet. Now, when you have rock and roll and you want to use the, more kind of a distorted sound and just more strong and power, then if it's all in the high register, it gets really, really difficult to handle with the ear because it's too bright, like bees around your head.
Oh.
So, and that's why first I added 5th string, and I said, well, let's do one more. Because now my lowest string is only like half tone shy of the lowest on the guitar.
With this instrument, though, since you have 6 strings, the neck is really wide. It's so
Yes.
much different from your other instrument. So did that take some getting used to?
Yeah.
Or how do you handle that?
Like famous comedian Benny Hill said, with great difficulties. Well, seriously, everything takes time, and there's a learning curve. I mean, the whole thing about this project from day one was extremely exciting, but extremely challenging, because again, you really have to make up things as you go along. So like about the width, of course, it's not what we used to, but the good thing is I'm not playing, all 6 strings at the same time, So if I play upper chords, usually lower strings, and solos, usually on upper strings. So,
Okay.
and, I'm getting used to it. And I used to have frets, by the way,
Oh,
one of the generations earlier, because there were some big problems with intonation. But then I realized that if you create frets, it will create even more problems with intonation. Because we have a guitar, you have enough room between the frets. This one is much smaller, so you just have to manually adjust.
what are the specific strings on your 6-string violin?
Yeah, they go down in fifths,
Okay.
so it goes from E, A, D, G, like traditional violin. It goes down to C, like a viola, and then another fifth down to F. So it's
Okay.
all fifths.
Would you mind demonstrating a little
Of
bit
course.
for us?
I thought you'd never ask. So this is just your traditional kind of a violin. You could recognize it. So this is kind of traditional. But then I could. So I can even do some of those guys.
That's wonderful, wonderful. Now, one of the reasons you do this, one of the reasons you're doing this interview is to reach the next generation of musicians. So what we did was we reached out to some of our younger musicians, and I've asked them to ask some questions of you. So here come some questions from the students and the younger generation. So how did you learn musicality?
Well, I was very fortunate because, again, I was raised in a family of like super professional violinists. Again, my father is a world-class violinist. So from day one, when I was 5 years old, my father immediately put me on this very serious professional situation. Yeah, I went to Moscow, well-known music school, and the musicality, and it is something, of course, when you have a father like that, helps so much to develop. But it doesn't mean that it's not possible to become an artist with musicality if you don't have fathers that have music.
Right.
I think you start with just developing. First, you have to have passion. First, you need love. You need to have passion. If you don't have it, you can get the best teachers, everything, forget about it. You need to love what you do. Once they do, then if you could take them to teachers, you could inspire them, and then you develop it.
Do you have a specific way to maybe teach musicality to someone who kind of lacks it?
Yeah, I think the way to do it is to inspire. I don't like to force it. There's a very good Russian expression. You can take a bull to a water fountain, but you cannot force him to drink. So the idea is to inspire kids somehow, show them, take them to the concerts, play them some amazing recordings or videos, inspire them. And I think that would kind of create that atmosphere where the kids become, just feel that inspiration.
Okay. So other than inspiration, what can a young musician do themselves to develop musicality in their own playing?
I think they should do two things. One, believe it or not, they have to build technique, even though it's not directly involved with the musicality. But technique is extremely important, because if you're limited with technique, you can only do so much with musicality. So it's a win-win. If you have the technique, they work hand in hand, like muscles and bones and tendons, they work hand in hand. So if you got technique, you're like, oh my God, I'm a master, I can do this and this. And then it triggers your musicality as well. So I would suggest try to develop musicality and technique together.
Mm-hmm. I think you hit on something a little earlier when you said something about when you were 12 and you took on the Paganini, and then you added maturity to that. And then does that help with your musicality as well, the maturity level?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what's interesting, I remember when I played the 24 Paganini caprices, I remember that the more musical ideas I put, the more it helps me technically, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So the technique, musicality, they are very important components that go hand in hand.
Well, our next question from a young musician is, how do you teach, or how do you overcome being scared to perform?
Homework is everything.
Okay.
On all levels. I'm not just talking about learning the notes. Whatever, everybody has their own stage fright. They have their own crazy, dark reasons why they're afraid. But they have stage fright. Some people forget this. Some people have problems with this. It doesn't matter. Whatever issues you have, like for example, if there's a technical passage inside of a concerto or piece of music you have to play, and that creates pressure for you, then put extra efforts on that particular part. Okay. And famous Yasha Heifetz said something really profound about it. He's like, when you prepare for the concert, prepare like 130%. It's like, if it's too late, like they say, milk is spilled. If you haven't learned something enough, that's your problem. Now it's too late to fix it. It's going to make it even worse. So go and just enjoy it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Relax.
Very good. So our next question then comes from another young musician. What have been some of your performance barriers?
I hate to say it, I really didn't feel like I had barriers in that it just came so, you see, classical violin came very natural to me, with my parents, my father, and the barrier was more with my electric violin, because again, I was trespassing to the whole different world when I came to America. It's like I was trespassing. And I was insisting on just writing my own music and composing. So that was much more challenging.
It leads us to our next question is, what do you struggle with as a professional musician? And it might not be your technique, it might be something else.
Musically or in general?
It could be musically, or I was thinking that, business-wise too, because professional musicians, we're not real good business people most of the time.
Absolutely.
So I wonder, this question could go either way. It could go musically, or it could go in a different direction. So what do you deal with?
I think musically we kind of talk, but on the business side, I think especially these days, with the incredible convenience of internet, I think the artist overall is much more independent than in the past, Because in the past you had what they call a middleman, whether it's a record executive or manager. Now, thanks to the internet and convenience of social media and YouTube, you know, I have quite a few friends, they have incredible appeal on their own, and they make good money. So business-wise, it's like, if you have good head, knowing what you do and connect to build your own fan base, you'll be in good shape.
Good. So here's another question from a youngster. How did you learn to be rhythmically accurate?
Inside, I don't like metronomes, by the way, because it's too static and it's too cold, you know?
Yeah.
You have to build your sense of rhythm inside of your head. Like go, I don't know how young he is, but go to a club, listen to the beats. Seriously, make your body, you know, connect to this beat. Because when I play classical music, you know, I'm counting inside of my head. I don't count it out loud, because then they'll throw tomatoes at me from the audience. But you know, I'm counting, especially solo, because the orchestra helps. But if you do solo, I'm counting.
Gotta count. So these two kind of go hand in hand. Doing this as a profession, do you feel fulfilled, and how do you stay fulfilled?
I personally stay fulfilled by constantly coming up with interesting creative ideas. Whether it's a new piece or pieces for violin. For example, I'm going to Germany next week to do a new recording of newly kind of discovered pieces by Henri Vioton. That's very exciting for me because it's something fresh and new. And of course, on electric, I always write new compositions and new arrangements. And so for me personally, to keep you going over the years and stay and be excited to what you do, don't just sit and say how good you are and be happy with this. It's good, but don't be too happy about this. It's always find new ideas.
We're pretty much out of time this morning, and I really, really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you. And I know our youngsters will just be floored by your performance over this weekend. So thank you so much for your being
pleasure.
here
Thank
and
you
for
so
opening
much.
up to us today.
Thank you so much.